They called it a phase. The sketchbooks piled under my bed, the colored pencils worn down to stubs, the hours spent in silence at the kitchen table, shading the curve of a cheek, the corner of an eye, the folds in a curtain. I remember every minute of it. They didn't. To them, it was just another distraction. Like the time I learned to braid hair on my dolls, or how I once tried to teach myself the piano by ear before giving up after 2 weeks. A child's fixation. Temporary, harmless, forgettable. But it wasn't. Drawing was never just a hobby to me. It was how I heard the world. While my siblings debated politics over dinner, and my parents recited career goals like they were commandments, I would look out the window and draw how the wind touched the grass. I noticed the way shadows shifted across our living room wall. I saw the sadness in my mother's eyes when no one was watching, the tightness in my father's shoulders even when he smiled, and I drew it all, not for praise, not for approval, just to understand. But understanding was never something they valued in the same way. We were not a cruel family, just efficient. Success was a formula, and deviation was weakness. My older brother followed the formula perfectly. Law school, internships, a girlfriend with a good family name, and a LinkedIn profile polished like glass. My younger sister was the golden one, top of her class, debate club, medical school applications by junior year. She glowed, and we were expected to orbit her like planets. I was the space between, quiet, thoughtful, soft, in a house built from steel. When I turned 15, I painted a portrait of my grandmother from memory. It wasn't perfect, her eyes were too close, and the left corner of her mouth tilted higher than it should have, but it looked like her, felt like her. She'd passed away a year before, and for weeks I'd felt like I couldn't breathe, like her absence had sucked the air from every room. But when I finished that painting, something inside me settled. I showed it to my parents. They looked at it for 3 seconds. Then my father said, "You've always had a good eye." My mother added, "Just don't forget to study for your biology test." And that was it. No frame, no wall space, just a pat on the head and a reminder that art was not the same as achievement. So I learned to hide it, or at least to keep it quiet. I still drew, painted, but mostly at night, or on weekends when the house was empty. I painted on old cardboard, grocery bags, anything I could find. Real canvases were expensive, and we didn't waste money on things that would never lead to a career. Even when I got a small scholarship to a local art program. My parents shrugged. "Good for you," my mother said, without looking up from her laptop. Later that night, I heard her telling my father it was just a phase, and that I'd come to my senses once I applied to university. But it wasn't a phase. It was breathtaking. It was blood. It was the only thing that made sense when nothing else did. When senior year came around, I applied to 2 sets of schools. One set to please them business schools, practical majors, future salaries. The other set for me art programs with long-shot portfolios and vague promises of creativity. They only knew about the first set. When I got accepted to both, I hesitated. I stared at the letters. One was full of safety, structure, approval. The other was risk, rebellion, real. I didn't choose right away. I waited for a sign or courage or something to move the weight in my chest that said, "You are not allowed to choose yourself." And then, one morning, while eating breakfast in silence, my father looked up and said, "We've decided. Business at Milton. It's solid. Your uncle can help you get an internship." I hadn't said a word yet. Hadn't even shown them the other letter. They had already decided. I was just the vessel. I remember walking out that morning, out of the house, out of the story they'd written for me. I went to the park, sat on a bench, opened my sketchbook, and cried. Not because I was angry, not even because I was scared. but because I knew, in that moment, that choosing myself would mean losing something else, maybe forever. I left home the day after I turned 18. No fight, no drama, no slammed doors, just a suitcase, my sketchbooks, and a folded acceptance letter to the Art Institute downtown. I didn't say goodbye. They didn't ask where I was going. Maybe that was the answer we both needed. The apartment I found was more of a storage room than a living space. A tiny unit tucked above an aging cafe, with creaky floors, yellow-tinted windows, and a radiator that coughed in winter. But it was quiet, and it was mine. I painted in the early mornings and waited tables in the evenings. I stretched each dollar like canvas, turning instant noodles into meals and old t-shirts into rags. I scavenged art supplies from donation bins, thrift stores, and student clearouts. Sometimes I painted over old canvases I found in trash piles. Giving forgotten art a second chance felt like healing something deeper than just the surface. My professors were tough but honest. I failed often, got things wrong, started over more times than I could count. But every critique taught me something. Every rejection made my hands steadier, my lines braver. There were nights I cried into the crook of my arm, exhausted from working until 2 a, messy, only to be up again at 7 for class. There were weeks when I sold sketches on the street just to afford paint, and there were long stretches of silence from my family months, even years where I wondered if I'd been erased from their story. But even in those quietest moments, I never stopped painting, because painting was the only time I felt whole. I remember the first time I sold a piece, not a print, a real painting. It was an abstract landscape, shades of winter, deep blues bleeding into pale gray, thin strokes of silver and white, like the memory of snow. I had hung it at a student gallery, more out of requirement than expectation. I didn't think anyone would notice it. It wasn't flashy. It didn't scream, but someone did. A woman, middle-aged, kind eyes. She stared at it for a long time, longer than anyone else. She didn't ask about the technique. She didn't question the title. She just said, "This feels like the year I lost my mother." Then she bought it for $250 to anyone else. It may not have meant much. To me, it felt like the world had cracked open. I started getting small commissions after that. Word spread, slowly, quietly. People found me through one another, through friends, through whispers. I didn't chase galleries. I didn't network. I just kept creating. Not everything sold. Most didn't. But I kept going because every time someone connected with a piece, I felt less alone. And maybe so did they. Meanwhile, my family went on without me. I saw glimpses of them through photos my cousin posted online. My brother's engagement party, my sister's graduation, a new car in the driveway, a vacation in Italy. They looked happy, whole. There was no space for the girl who once sketched on napkins and whispered dreams of color. Still, I sometimes wrote letters I never sent. Birthdays, holidays, random Tuesdays, not to ask for forgiveness, not to explain myself, but to remember. Because forgetting would have been easier. And I didn't want it to be easy. I wanted it real. 2 years after I moved out, I passed by my childhood home. The windows were open, the lights were on. Laughter spilled out onto the lawn, carried by the scent of cooked meat and familiarity. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. But my chest ached for days after. By my 4th year of art school, I had developed a rhythm. Work, paint, sleep, repeat. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. I took freelance illustration jobs, designed book covers for local authors, painted murals in cafes for free coffee and tips, and somehow it was enough. Enough to pay rent, enough to keep creating, enough to keep going. And then, one day, everything changed. I got an email from someone I didn't know, a gallery curator in New York. She had seen one of my pieces in a local magazine. A friend had shown it to her. She liked my use of color, my restraint, my emotion. She asked if I'd be interested in exhibiting. I reread the message 7 times, then cried in the middle of the street. I said yes. The gallery was tucked away on a narrow street, between a used bookshop and a bakery that always smelled like burnt cinnamon. Nothing grand, no red carpets, no champagne trays or television crews, but to me, it was a cathedral. They gave me 1 wall, 4 pieces. I chose them carefully, not the most polished, not the most technical, just the most honest. Paintings that held grief, longing, joy, and the silence between them. I framed them with thin wood, unvarnished, like bones exposed to light. The opening night was quiet, a soft murmur of strangers walking from canvas to canvas, pausing with tilted heads, fingers on chins, questions in their eyes. I stood in the back, unnoticed, heart thudding like it wanted out of my chest. And then someone asked the curator, "Who painted these?" She pointed to me, a woman mid-40s, elegant scarf, voice like stone walked over. She didn't ask for meaning. She didn't ask where I studied. She simply said, "You made me feel something I forgot I knew." Then she bought 2. Just like that. She paid more than I made in a month waiting tables. After that, things moved quickly. My name began circulating in places I had never dared to imagine. A writer featured me in an art column. An indie magazine did a photo essay on emerging artists who paint with their wounds. Commissions began to arrive, not dozens, but enough. Enough to rent a small studio space. Enough to buy real canvases without guilt. Enough to breathe easier. I still lived simply, still counted bills, still painted late into the night under flickering light. But now, I knew I had a place in the world, a place that didn't require me to apologize for how I saw beauty. I was working on a new piece one morning, broad strokes, oil, muted greens against grays, when my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something in me, quiet and insistent, told me to pick up. It was my mother. Her voice didn't carry its usual distance. It cracked around the edges, brittle and strange. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask where I'd been. She simply said, "We're in trouble." It turns out the perfect house with perfect windows and perfect laughter wasn't so perfect anymore. There had been a bad investment. My father trusted a friend. My brother got involved. Loans were taken, then defaulted. Legal threats, frozen assets, and debts with interest rates that climbed like fire up the walls. They were days away from losing everything. And I, black sheep, disappointment, phase-driven artist, was their last hope. I said nothing, not out of cruelty, out of shock, not because they needed me, but because, for the first time, they knew they needed me. I visited the house the next day. It looked the same. The walls were still white, the lawn is still trimmed, but the silence inside had changed. It wasn't heavy with pride anymore. It was hollowed by fear. My father looked smaller. His hands fidgeted in his lap like he didn't know what to do with them. My mother's eyes darted when she spoke, searching for footing in a conversation she never imagined having. They explained the number, the debt, the deadlines. They never said the word sorry, not directly, but it hung in the air like smoke unspoken. Bitter, choking. I listened. Then I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the yard where I used to sit and draw clouds with pencil stubs on notebook pages no one ever read. And I made my decision. I didn't give them everything, but I gave them enough. Enough to stop the bleeding, enough to keep the house, enough to silence the threats and give them time to breathe. I didn't write a check that day. I simply handed them the names of two collectors, both of whom had made offers on my latest work. One piece in particular, a large canvas, abstract, mostly white and gold. I had painted it during a week when I felt nothing and everything all at once. One of the collectors offered 6 figures. That painting, once sold, would clear the debt. They stared at the paper in disbelief. My father held it like it might vanish if he blinked. My mother touched her mouth, as if to keep something inside. I turned to leave. At the door, I paused and looked back. This, I said softly, was never a phase. Then I walked away. After the painting sold, I didn't hear from them for weeks. No thank you, no message, no call, just silence. At first, I resented it. I told myself I expected nothing, but part of me still waited for a word, a gesture, a crack in the armor. But silence can mean many things. In their world, silence had always meant power, superiority, the absence of need. Now, I wondered if it meant shame. I buried myself in work. The commissions kept coming. My name appeared in articles I didn't have time to read. I was asked to speak on panels, attend events. I declined most of them. I wasn't interested in being a personality. I had no desire to be anyone's symbol. I just wanted to paint. Some days I still woke up afraid it would all disappear, that the world would realize I didn't belong, that the girl they had once mocked was still inside me, uncertain, fragile, searching for her worth in color and shape. But then I'd stand in front of a blank canvas, and I'd begin again. And that, somehow, was enough. It was my sister who broke the silence. She showed up at my studio unannounced. I hadn't seen her in years. She looked different, older. Not in her face, but in her eyes. There was something softer there, like something had cracked inside her, and light had found a way through. She didn't ask for anything. She just stood in the doorway for a while, taking it all in. The canvases leaned against walls, the smell of paint, the quiet hum of an unfinished song playing on repeat. "It's beautiful," she said. Her voice was low, careful. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure what she meant, my space, my work, or something else. She walked over to a small painting on the side table, one I hadn't planned to show anyone, a portrait, barely finished, of our grandmother painted from memory, again, years after the first time. She reached out to touch the edge of the frame, but stopped just before her fingers made contact. She would have been proud. She said, "Of you, of this," then she left. That night, I sat in the quiet and cried. Not because I was sad, but because I hadn't realized how long I had been holding everything in. After that, the shifts came gradually. My mother sent a letter, not an email, but a real letter, handwritten in ink that smudged in some places. It wasn't an apology in words, but in tone. It was the closest she had ever come. She wrote about a painting I had made as a teenager, one she had found in the attic while clearing old boxes, a sketch of our garden in winter, bare branches tangled against the gray sky. She said she never realized how much of me had been in those lines, and how much she had missed it. I didn't reply, but I kept the letter in a drawer. And sometimes, on cold mornings, I reread it slowly, like forgiveness was something that could be absorbed over time. Eventually, my father reached out too, not with words, not directly, but one day, I received a package, a frame. Inside it was the first portrait I had ever painted of our grandmother, the one I had shown them years ago, the one they'd dismissed with a shrug and buried in storage. He had found it, repaired the small tear at the corner, reframed it. At the bottom of the box, in stiff handwriting, were 3 words. "We were wrong. That was all, but it was everything. Forgiveness doesn't always come with clarity. Sometimes it arrives in fragments, in the way someone lingers a second longer, in the pause before they speak, in the gifts wrapped in silence and sent without expectation. I didn't forgive them because they earned it. I forgave them because I didn't want to carry the weight anymore, because my life had become too full for bitterness, because the girl who once needed their approval had grown into a woman who no longer measured herself by their understanding. They had mocked my love for art. Now they saw what it had become. Not just a passion, not just a livelihood, but a way of speaking the truth they had refused to hear. And now, at last, they were listening. I live in a quiet place now, a loft above an old flower shop, where the air smells of lavender and wet earth, and the light comes through the windows in long golden stripes. It's not big, it's not grand, but it's full of what I need: space, silence, and color. Every morning, I make tea and sit near the canvas, waiting, not for inspiration, but for stillness, because painting doesn't always begin with an idea. Sometimes it begins with permission, the kind we give ourselves when the world has taken too much and we are still willing to create. My life is not perfect. I still work late. Some months are lean. I still question myself when a painting won't come together. I still walk into galleries and feel like an imposter. But I no longer live for their approval, anyone's. I paint because it is how I breathe, and no one can take that from me again. My family visits sometimes now. Not often, but enough. They bring small offerings, a new set of brushes, a book on color theory, pastries from the cafe down the street. They don't talk about the past. They don't pretend we didn't hurt each other. But in their gestures, I see an effort to repair what was once dismissed. My mother still can't say the word art without a tightness in her voice, but she keeps one of my prints in her bedroom now, a quiet piece, mostly blue. My father came to one of my exhibitions last spring. He stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes lingering longer than I expected. He didn't say much, but later that night, I found a note tucked into my coat pocket. 4 words, all in his handwriting. "You made something real." I keep that note on my desk, not for validation, for closure. I think often about the girl I used to be, the one sitting on the back porch, sketching clouds while her siblings talked about grades and future salaries, the one who heard "you'll grow out of it" so many times she almost believed it, the one who left home with nothing but her art and the ache of not being seen. I don't mourn her anymore. I honor her with every brush stroke, every canvas, every moment I choose creation over bitterness. They mocked me for loving something they didn't understand. They told me it wouldn't last, that it wasn't the future, that it wouldn't feed me, that it wouldn't matter. But it did. It does. It paid the bills. It healed the wounds. It brought color to a world that once tried to grayscale me into silence. And more than anything, it saved me.